Welcome to another edition of the Sunday Drive. The Sunday Drive is sponsored by Midtown Mattress on William Street in Lindsay. They have so much more than just mattresses, so check them out. On the outside, it appeared as if lawyer Jason Ward had it all. He has a loving family, a beautiful home here in Lindsay, and a very successful law practice. But on the inside, Ward, who could be considered a workaholic, was starting to resent the long hours he was spending at work. In order to cope with the stress, he began to drink. That led him down a dark and dangerous path. Here's his journey.
But in my mid-40s, I ran into issues where I couldn't manage the volume of work that I was doing. I find it very difficult to continue to run this larger and larger firm, and I turned to alcohol to help with that. So at one time I was on a beach down in the Caribbean, and I had never drank alcohol throughout my life. I drank very infrequently. Alcohol was not a factor in my life. And then in Port Vallarta one day, I ordered a drink, and it was an immediate sensation for me. I don't know what clicked on that particular day, why that particular rum and coke did this, but I felt immediate relief from all the things that were churning in my mind so much that it just shut things off. And I was, completely relaxed. And I said, I really like this. And unfortunately, that turned into alcohol use disorder because it gradually became more and more and more.
I was shocked actually when you said in the podcast with the law, was it Law Times?
Canadian Bar Association.
Canadian Bar Association, that you were drinking up to 24 bottles of wine a week.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Towards the end, my volume was very high, and for me, it was a classic story of starting small and growing and gradually building. So at the beginning, it was 3 or 4 drinks a day. A year later, it was a bottle of wine a night with some pre-drinks after I get home. And then I ended up escalating to that volume of drinking.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you eventually entered or stopped drinking, right? At one point, you got to the point where you said you were going to stop drinking.
I did. I stopped just after the pandemic began. And I had to spend a lot of time with some professionals to help me to stop and to help me to stay at work. Because without the alcohol, I then faced the challenge of how am I going to continue to helm this big firm with these high profile clients. And so I needed help to try to get through that. So I spent about a year with a psychiatrist in Toronto. And when I say I invested in this, I did. It was 3 times a week, 45-minute sessions for a year, just to try to come up with a plan of action for me to be able to stay at my job and to continue on being a lawyer at my firm. And I did that while sober. The problem I ran into is I couldn't continue, I couldn't function without some release escape hatch. And since I was determined to continue to be sober from alcohol, lo and behold, I discovered something called THC. And again, I had never even experimented with drugs in my life throughout my life. I had never done any drugs per se, other than a couple of joints when I was younger. That's about it. And I discovered that I could go up to my recently legalized cannabis store. And, it started out with many people can have, a gummy or two, about 5 to 10 milligrams of THC and be moderately high for an evening. And that's how I started. I started with the gummies, and you see them in your feed on your social media. It's the very same thing. And I started using those, and that wasn't enough. So I escalated. And eventually I discovered you could buy just very concentrated THC pills, just little tiny pills. Legally. And they had to order them in, but they didn't have a problem with that. And by a year later, and whoever says and I said this not long ago, whoever says marijuana isn't addictive is entirely wrong. I became addicted to it, there's no question. And while most people took a gummy or two a day, 5 to 10 milligrams, I was easily over, in excess of 50 milligrams per evening of THC. And it just became a complete shut off for me. I turned off a valve or flipped a switch, and everything in my mind that was spinning and racing just dissipated. And that's what I evolved into. I had to have that switch. I couldn't not have it anymore because I was really suffering if I wasn't able to do that. And so I realized at the time, what I'm not battling is alcoholism, nor am I battling a drug addiction. I'm battling some underlying mental health issues that I then started to focus on. So when the drugs became a problem for me, I really became scared because I started coveting more stronger drugs and started taking steps to find and locate and procure hard drugs. And I knew if I went down that road, I wouldn't be able to stop it. So I went.
Scared you.
It did scare me, and frankly, I was pretty open with my wife Carissa about a lot of this, not everything, but she had a sense that I would escalate, and I was heading down that road. So together we decided that I needed to go get some help. So I went into a very good immersive, I'll call it rehab facility in Montreal for 30 days. And it's at that place that I really realized a lot about my behavior and what I was doing and why I was doing it. And since that time, I've managed to be clean and sober, and I was released from rehab about a year ago now. I began to delegate work excessively to other lawyers at my firm. At one point for almost a year, a good example would be I would pull up behind the building that I own downtown in my black F-150, and I would be in that vehicle for an hour just on my own, working up whatever I needed to work up in order to go into the office and deal with work that day. And that just got worse and worse and worse. Towards the end, in the evenings, and I was always a 24/7 lawyer. I was always on. And in the evenings, I can remember getting an email from a client or another lawyer that had conflict in it, or a problem or an issue. And it made me physically ill. I couldn't even process it anymore. And there were occasions where I literally had to become physically sick because I just couldn't deal with anything else coming at me like that. And that really led to more and more and more drug use until that just got shut off, and I stopped checking my emails, which I've never done historically in my career. So that's why I think my drug use paralleled my behavioral work.
Do you ever think about what would have happened if you weren't able to access the rehab and the mental health therapy that you needed?
Fortunately, I did get great resources. The problem is that I'm in a very fortunate position because I was able to access those and pay for those. Those weren't OHIP covered services. And when you speak about hiring a Toronto-based psychiatrist for a year intensively, I also hired a sober coach out of Toronto, an excellent addictions sober coach. And then the cost of rehab, these are resources that many people can't access. So I was very fortunate to be in a position that I could access them. But throughout that period of time, I questioned and wondered, what do people do who don't have these resources to access these things? And I still haven't found the answer to that. So it's still something that I think about and that bothers me, and that needs to be changed.
Yeah, because even just here in Lindsay, where you live, we're dealing with an increase in crime, seemingly, and drug addiction, mental health, and a lot of these people are going in and out, a revolving door in and out of jail and probably not receiving the help they need. You may have been one of them if you didn't get the help you needed.
Yeah, you could be absolutely right. And you're right. I'm convinced that my experience in the last 2 years has led me to conclude that mental health is everywhere in this community. And I'd be shocked to hear about a family in our community that isn't in some way affected by mental health. Some more severe than others. But it is pervasive and insidious. It's everywhere. And it still shocks me how far behind we are as a society in looking upstairs instead of just downstairs in ourselves.
In part 2 of this edition of the Sunday Drive, we find out why Ward withdrew from the City of Kawartha Lake's mayoral race and how he feels about the issue of legalizing drugs. That's next Sunday on the Sunday Drive.